This is Counsel Cast, and I'm your host, Karin Conroy, your Marketing Co-Counsel. In every episode, I discuss marketing topics with experts who answer your questions and help your law firm achieve next-level results. Here's today's guest.
We are an organization that helps women law firm owners scale their law firm businesses to and through 7 figures in gross annual revenue. I'm happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you here, Davina. Your name comes up all the time because you've got such an awesome, defined, narrow, targeted brand, and it's so well done. So I'm excited to have this
Thank
conversation.
you.
We have so much to talk about.
Thank you.
So let me first say the title for today's show is How Do Female Founders Redefine Marketing for $1 million law firms? So let's start first with this idea of why are we only talking about women? I mean, you and I are both women, so I feel like I'm kind of an expert.
Right, exactly.
But why? I'm sure you get this question all the time, but why do you only work with women?
It's so interesting because I think from the male perspective, it may seem like, well, you're a man hater, right?
Yes.
It's really not that. It really is just providing a place for just women, because I do think for decades, for hundreds of years, there have been places just for men
Yeah.
to nurture and their careers and network and that kind of thing. And so for me, I just I have coached men law firm owners as well as women. I've coached other types of professional service business owners. But what I found was that when I began to gather people into groups, that the conversation was different when it was just women than when it was men and women.
Yes.
And I know that men today share some of the responsibility for parenting and things like that, whereas in my generation, Gen X, that really was not as common. We were kind of the leaders of that sort of movement. But I just know that like women still do 90% of the mental work for running their households, including parenting. And there's a biological component to women sort of being the birth givers and then feeling that attachment to children and how they're going to be parents to those children. And it's different than it is with men, not to say that men aren't also great parents to their children and that kind of thing. But so, and that's one aspect. Another aspect are things like what it's like to be a woman in a predominantly male workplace or male field, and what kinds of things that, we want to see different, right? When with us owning the business. So I remember very well working for male-owned businesses and in the 90s. And there was a lot of just kind of commonplace sort of behavior that today would be characterized as sexual harassment or something like that. Like it was just wasn't something that we really did anything about other than just learn how to laugh politely and walk away, like get yourself out of, right?
Yeah.
And
I
so
feel like
there's just a lot of things about
even when we look back at movies and stuff, I have 2 relatively small kids. And when we show them movies, if we show them movies from like the 80s or 90s, we often have to kind of quickly do a Google search to see that there were different standards. And it was okay to say things in a different way, in the same way that it was totally different in the 50s and the 60s, but in that era, it was different. And it was definitely different for women. And there were roadblocks, there were challenges, and just kind of systemic issues. So it was kind of like you read my mind in the end of what you were talking about there, because the next part I wanted to talk about what were some of those traditional roadblocks. And I want to kind of quickly introduce where I want to go with this. I feel like where our conversation is going to head is into this kind of broken legal industry and the way things were traditionally done versus the things you and I both know that you can do differently to perform way better than or even perform at all. Like there's a lot of these traditional firms that are just totally failing. So let's first talk about like the broken part. Like what were some of those barriers and issues and challenges that especially women faced?
So it's interesting because I was telling you before, I worked in a law firm, and anybody who knows my story knows this. I worked in a law firm before I became a lawyer. I was their marketing manager of the law firm, and I ran the marketing department, which consisted of me, basically.
Yeah.
When I left, they put 3 people in my position. But so that was one thing that was different, right?
Yeah.
And also you were basically a lawyer or a secretary. They couldn't really put you in any other categories. Largely men, largely white men. I grew up in the South. I was working for a old Southern, venerable traditional law firm.
Yeah.
And they were very proud of their culture and everything. And they had women partners then who were kind of coming up. Their diversity was to add white women,
Yeah.
right, to be partners, and that was the first step.
Yeah.
But what was interesting in the 80s and the 90s is in careers is that women had to adopt male behaviors.
Yes.
So we dressed in the suits with the shoulder pads out to
Yes.
here, which I loved, by the way, because I have very narrow shoulders. So that was fantastic. And the bigger, like we had to project power.
Yes.
And we had to, if we wanted a seat at the table, we had to learn golf, and
Oh,
we had to
gross.
learn how to network in sports, be able to talk about sports. We had to be able to adopt these male behaviors
Yeah.
to be able to be seen as an equal, right?
Yeah.
And that often meant making choices about whether or not to be a parent, to be a mother.
Yeah.
I, for one, am not a mother. And part of the reason why is because my career was very important to me. And I didn't see how I could do that and have children and do that both well. And I know there are a lot of women who did and who have.
Yeah.
But I also just don't have the stamina for that around the clock kind of thing of mothering and performing at that sort of level that men who have wives who do those things. And
Right.
that was really still very common in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. 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 I was going to say I tell this story often, but I don't tell it usually ever on the podcast. But when I was finishing my MBA, I sat down with my professor, and in my class, I'm in Southern California. It's relatively diverse. Like, it was considered diverse, but there was probably a handful of women in my class versus, it was probably at least 80% men. And so I sat down, and I'm at the time in my 30s, and I sat down with my professor. We're having these exit interviews about, like, what are you doing next? What's your plans for your life and all of that stuff. And I said, well, I'm thinking about getting a PhD, but I also want to have kids. And he stopped in his tracks and he said, I have never had this conversation before. And I said, why are you kidding me? This was not in 1963. This was
Right,
not that long
exactly.
ago. And I said, are you kidding me? Then you are missing something, because I know there's not a lot of women in this program, but there are some, and we're all in the same age. And and he was like just mind blown that would be some factor in how you plan your career going forward, because it's not for men. So let's just kind of, for the most part, obviously I don't want to totally blanket statement, for the most part, when men are planning out their education and their career and their path, they don't have to account for children and how that might impact, change, and affect their schedule, their availability, and just like their entire timeline.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from, women are the birth givers, right?
Yeah.
And so there is, regardless of what happens, there's going to be 9 months of that happening to your body, plus the birth of a child.
Yep.
And you're going to be the one that child needs and wants, especially if you're breastfeeding and that kind of thing,
Right.
And so there is just a biological component that it's going to affect your life, that it
Right.
doesn't happen to men. That doesn't mean that in this day and age, we aren't seeing more men involved with parenting at earlier ages and things like that. But it used to be that men never thought of that. They
Right.
thought of it only in terms of, I'm going to have to support more people. Right.
Exactly. I have more mouths to feed. They always said
Right.
that, like, I have more mouths to feed. And so basically I need to make more money.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this conversation is interesting because I work with so many millennial women. I'm a Gen Xer. I work with so many millennial women and Gen Z women coming up, and and a lot kind of don't really understand that framework,
Right.
because they can't. It's so foreign to them. Like, they've been
Yeah.
brought up by power mothers, super mothers who were out
Right.
there, working and raising kids. Going through law school, I was just amazed. My roommate, when I took the bar, she got really sick, took the bar and passed it with flying colors. She got really sick the night of the bar exam. But she gave birth to like 4 children and 2. She started law school pregnant and ended it pregnant. Like she
Oh my
gave birth and
gosh.
then had it. And I was just like, you're amazing. You're
Yeah.
superwoman. You're
Right.
amazing. And
Yeah.
she was also a JAG. I mean, she
Oh my
became
gosh.
yeah, she was in the military and she became a military attorney. And so just an incredible person. And I
Yeah.
think how hard that is.
Yeah.
And I don't think we give credit to women on how hard it is to have all of this change going on in your biologically in your body and then
Right.
giving birth to a whole other human. First, we made a whole other human,
Right.
then we give birth to a whole other human.
Well,
And
and not to
then,
mention just the schedule. I mean, once you have a kid, that first until they go to kindergarten, the scheduling requirements, whether you have put them in daycare, whatever choices you make, there are scheduling requirements there that add a whole other layer of complexity to your life. Whether
yeah.
you're at home, whether you have a nanny, whether you're working from whatever it is, it complicates things.
And
So,
I want to make sure before we move on from this,
yeah,
I want to make sure that we don't leave out women who don't have children because it is
yes,
still a different experience. Because
100%.
as I said, I was one who didn't have children, and I was, I worked for a succession of male-owned businesses, a
Yeah.
engineering firm and law firm and ad agency. And one of the things that was very interesting is that I was treated differently by male clients. So I was supposed to be sort of networking and bringing in business and things like that. My boss wanted me to do that, hired me for a different position, but then thought I would do that. But what happened is the male clients wanted to date me.
Oh,
They wanted to
gross.
hang out. Like it's a whole different
Yeah.
thing, what you think you're being friendly and warm and, like having a relationship that's
Yes.
professional. And then they're looking at you going, "Oh, you're single. You
Hi.
must be
Yeah.
hubba hubba." And
Right.
I'm just like, so it's not just about being a mother is my
Right.
point is like there are a lot of challenges that women face because of the male female dynamics. And I think a lot of men are really pissed off because of after the whole Me Too movement, it's like, oh, I'm having to deal with all these challenges in the workplace. And
Yeah,
you're
and it's
like,
like,
well,
"Welcome."
welcome to the club,
Yeah,
buddy.
exactly. We've been here
We've been
forever.
navigating these
Yeah.
touchy subjects like the whole
Yeah,
time.
but quietly inside our heads. I think
Right.
that's a good transition because what I was gonna ask next is I feel like COVID, especially for law firms and the legal industry, was a big turning point because the legal industry in my experience has been kind of slow to change. And without something like COVID, it it would have taken forever. Like the change and there's the ability to have Zoom meetings, to recognize the importance of technology, working from home, all of these things that became normal during COVID probably would have taken the legal industry in my just rough estimate, many more years
Yeah,
than it
exactly.
did otherwise. So let's talk about kind of how that kind of played into women's roles and then how they set up their firms differently because of all of that. Because now that all seems more normal.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple factors. So I think COVID is definitely part of it. That hastened where we were heading.
Yeah.
And because I remember with law firms, it used to be a very big deal. You'd have when they started teleconferencing, and it
Yeah.
was like you had to buy all this expensive equipment,
Right.
and there was a big conference room, and the
Yeah.
partners would be teleconferencing with somebody, and it was a very special thing.
Yeah.
And
And
then
expensive. Like they never
and
did the cheap
expensive.
option. Yeah.
No, exactly. It was like
Yeah.
a whole and it never worked right.
Yeah.
And I know this because my husband, who's now my husband, worked for lawyers and law firms for years handling their technology. So I
Oh, yeah.
remember that,
Yeah,
right?
and they're all, like,
But
fumbling around,
ex-
desperate, like, "Where's your husband? We need him now." Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So this is I think COVID definitely changed the world. I mean, no
Yeah.
doubt it changed the world and it changed the way we work because we had to think more creatively about how we work. And
Yeah.
thank goodness the technology tools were there. And
Yeah.
I think it also spawned a lot of technology. And I'll give you
Yes.
an example. I started my virtual firm. So I had a regular law firm that I was growing in a traditional manner. And it just wasn't working for me. And I wound up walking away from it. It wasn't working for me because I gained like 30 pounds because I was working all the time. And all I wanted to do was eat and drink and like hated my life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I left, and after some time I started a virtual firm. And back then in 2011, the virtual firm was email and a phone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now all of these, in fact, I just joined a group because I wanted to learn about some new technology. All of these firms have all sorts of wonderful intake softwares,
Yep.
and AI is coming into play now in a lot of our case management and intake processes. And so I think it really spawned innovation in technology as well when people started saying, well, hey, it kind of is kind of cool that we can
Yeah.
work in a more flexible way,
Right.
right?
And it's
And
fine. Like, no, like, the work still happens, and we're
right,
able to get these things done, and we're able to move things forward. It's not completely, we don't have to shut everything down if we can't meet in a conference room. It's fine.
right.
Yeah.
And I think women have really been leaders in that arena
Yeah.
because we are so desperate as, a whole, as a general statement
Yeah.
for this flexibility. Like,
Yes.
how do I manage it all? And I need this flexibility. And so we just fell in love with this idea of, oh, great, I don't have to put on this suit and all
Yeah.
this makeup and these shoes and do my hair and fix the kids and get them off to daycare. I
Right.
can arrange for some childcare at home and I can come onto this meeting. Then I can sit in my office and knock out some work without having to, put on this whole persona to go
Right.
out into the world,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And I
And
see that.
drive and commute and all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I see that in what I do. I work with women who are starting and building their own law firms.
Yeah.
And some of them are 10 years in the journey, 15, some of them are just starting out. So it
Yeah.
it just depends on where they are. But I am so proud of this generation of women and the way that they are embracing technology, and also one of the biggest challenges that they're dealing with is, well, I have employees and I have female employees who have
Yeah.
different needs than male employees, and how do I handle that? So
Yes.
they're having to really wrestle with what it is like to be the boss and the owner of the company. And, oh, I've got 2 employees out on maternity leave, and how does that impact my business and my bottom line? And
Yeah.
then to see how they are handling that, that's really something that can be a model for the more traditional law firms in the world. Is take a look at how some of these young innovating women are handling this workplace environment in a more egalitarian sort of way. Like, how do we make that work?
Well, that was exactly my next question. I feel like we're kind of in this zone where you're reading my mind from one question to the next. But is kind of, what can these traditional firms like? Let's talk for a minute about some examples of how it's not working, how they're marketing, and I can throw some examples in too about things that I see all the time that are outdated. And in comparison, what some of the women you're coaching are doing to, so you mentioned kind of how they're addressing maternity leave, but in broader scale things, like what are they doing that's different and unique that these traditional firms could learn from them?
Yeah, so I think we want to talk about marketing because this is a marketing podcast. So
Yeah.
people, let's give them some marketing
Yeah.
conversation here, because there's obviously a lot of
A million
policies
things.
and things like that. But
Sure.
one of the things that I think, and I don't know that it's, I think there's women, and I think women sort of dominate in this, but there are men doing this as well. So I don't want to just say there aren't young men who are doing this. I think it's a lot of younger people, like
Yeah.
newer generations with new ideas. But one of the things is, I don't know if you're familiar with Single Mom Attorney. Single
No.
Mom Attorney. Oh, you need to check her out. She's
Okay.
fabulous, Gianni Avalos. But let me use her as an example. She's a client of mine, and Gianni went through law school as she was pregnant, and she graduated from law school, had a baby. She had the baby before she graduated. And there's a video of her getting her results from law school, holding her infant.
Oh.
And it's just a really powerful thing. And she started recording her life as a single mom attorney
Yeah.
and putting it out because she was seeking community from other women who understood that single mom pressure of taking care of a child and building a career at the same time that was meaningful, would provide for her child and all of that. And in the midst of sort of building this community for herself, it evolved into really a powerful marketing machine for her
Nice.
law firm.
Yeah.
98% of her clients, and her phone rings off the hook, are the result of her social media presence on Instagram and TikTok.
Amazing.
And it is
What
amazing.
kind of law does she practice?
She's a family law attorney,
Perfect. There you
and so
go.
she's attracting women who are maybe they're married, maybe they're not, maybe they're
Yep.
not, and they've got children and they need child support and they need some parenting plan arrangements and things. And she's also attracting women who are like, I'm going to go through this divorce and I need
But I
that.
know you can
And
relate.
she gets me. She gets me.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that is the huge thing about social media is that we're seeing more younger people, and a lot of them being women,
Yeah.
most of them being women that I see, because my algorithm is going to
Yeah.
feed me that. But
Right.
are they're putting themselves out there and showing this is who I am as a person and this is what it is in my day-to-day life. And they're connecting with people on an authentic level. This is who I am. And the people are resonating, going, that's who I aspire to be, or
Yes.
that's who I am, or that's
Mhm.
whatever. And so they're connecting in a way, whereas in traditional law firms, you would have more of a methodical kind of, we go to, I remember at the law firm that I used to work for, a lot of our marketing strategy was philanthropic dinners. We'd get up and
Yes.
get dressed up and go to galas, and we buy tables and we invite clients, and we did a lot of golfing. It was a
Yeah.
lot of attorneys who did a lot of golfing,
And it's
and
just
so
like
it's
showing
very
your
different.
money. It's like we are successful because we're here in this expensive golf course, or we're at this expensive philanthropic dinner or whatever. And so you should respect us. And that is kind of the old school way that you would earn kind of respect and expertise, is by showing that you had made a bunch of money. And
Right.
now I think that's just not how people see it anymore. And they don't really care if you've made money. They care that you care about them. And so the messaging is totally different. And I have a client that I'm working with right now that I have been working with for more than 10 years. And we had a meeting and I said, you know, that work that we did 10 plus years ago, everything is different. Like if I pulled all those files out, we wouldn't use any of that. And so I think that's one place where a lot of traditional firms are really making mistakes, is they're still doing the same stuff they did 10 years ago, and they
Well, and
think that's
here's
going to work.
and they think it's gonna work. It's like those it was like in the 2000s when we instantly knew what a 90s website looked like, right? Because
Exactly.
people took so long to, like, redo their website.
Yeah.
Well, I think too is there's this personal one-on-one authenticity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So even if I have a team of people working for me, I'm still the face of my wealthy woman lawyer brand
Yes.
at this moment. Now, I teach a lot of my law firm clients how to expand that brand beyond
Yeah.
themselves to include their team
Yeah.
as they grow their team, right?
Yep.
But there's still got to be that one on one. People are looking for that one on one connection.
Yeah.
This is somebody who gets me, as
Yes.
opposed to I'm going to go to someone's office who is superior to me
Right.
in
Right.
their, like, old school attorneys are like, I'm the knowledge holder and I'm the one, and you're going to do what I tell you to do.
Right.
And whereas, attorneys today are like, I have this knowledge and I'm a problem solver and we're going to solve this problem for you, but they're not talking down to people, right? They're
Right.
not put up, like, it's kind of that white coat syndrome with doctors. We don't look
Yes.
at doctors the way we used to, because
Mhm.
now we know that doctors do not study nutrition at all in medical school, so we start to question, do they even know if the first thing they're doing is not even, they're not even educated on menopause, or they're not educated
Yes.
on food, or they're not
Right.
educated on, we start to question, these generations question doctors, whereas my parents' generation, they're the silent generation. They're the doctors on the pedestal, and that's the way attorneys
Yes.
were looked at
Yes.
in the
Yes.
same way. So I
Yeah.
think that's changed.
Yeah. Well, and while you were saying that, I was thinking, we do have this whole conversation around doctors about whether they have a good bedside manner. And that, I don't think there's an equivalent phrase for lawyers, whether, and like in my mind, it's like, do you understand my problem? And are you conveying that you understand my problem? Or are you still in 1994 and you're putting up dollar signs all over your website and you're saying, we are X law firm in Y city and we do Z kind of law, and it's like, that is not messaging. That is like,
Well, what bothers me so much about the old-fashioned sort of like, law firms are this it's all about the lawyer's
yes,
credentials. Like, we have to have that I was on this board and I have this and I graduated at this point in my class and and I still think there's place for those types of law firms if you're looking at maybe the really ones who are working with, the Warren Buffetts of the world, maybe
yeah,
that is something, right?
yeah,
But I think what we're seeing that I really think is a beautiful thing
yeah,
is we're seeing that everybody can find an attorney that they can relate to,
yeah,
right?
yes,
And so if you can't relate to this guy, this old guy sitting in his office,
yep,
you may be able to relate to this person, right?
yes,
Who
yes,
because you're there's more representation happening. We're
yeah,
starting to see more people of color coming up and creating their own law firms and saying, "I'm the boss." And
yeah,
and what I always say to people is that if two bros can graduate from law school and start a law firm business and grow it to the point where it's a national or international firm a decade from now, 2 decades from now, right? So you open any mid to large law firm and you're going to see a lot of white male faces with
yeah,
some white females now that have kind of worked up. And, that's who you're going to see is like the leadership of the firm. If they can do it, why aren't the rest of us doing it?
yeah,
Because now we have access to the internet,
yep,
social media.
yeah.
These really level the playing fields because it allows us to reach people directly at a relatively low cost investment.
Well, and I wanted to come back to, because I think that emotional level of connection is something that is typically more feminine. And so,
Yeah.
um, when you're talking about that, the bio that the example that you were giving, where it's just like a list of all their representative cases, and I've seen a bajillion of these.
Yeah.
I know you
Oh,
have too.
I know you have.
And then it's like, I went to law school here and I did blah, and it's like, it makes me want to vomit. But as opposed to how a female would typically present herself, unless of course she's handed the male template, but the approach for more women is going to be to connect emotionally. And that's not something that's as easy for men. So how would you, or how do you kind of coach your clients through that messaging, and how to, let's just say in the example of a bio page, how would they change their bio so that it is kind of connecting more emotionally?
I think people are telling stories is the way, right?
Yes.
Telling your story.
Yep.
And also, your bio is not really about you.
Yes.
It's really about your audience, your target market, the people that you're trying to attract to work with you. So, how is it that why should they hire you? What about you makes somebody that they want to work with and hire? So, I'll give you an example of my bio that gets used a lot. I used to have an about me page and I recently changed my website where it's like one page and I've got everything on it.
Yeah.
SEO, it may not be great, but it's a great website because we did research and we were looking at our clients' websites and at our website, and we were seeing that we would sit there and watch where people were doing, and they were on the homepage and they would go to the about
Yep.
page.
Yep.
And so my about is it's just my journey is probably a lot like yours. I
Yes.
did this happened to me and here I am today, right? And
Yes.
that kind of approach is I get a lot of people who resonate with that because they
That is
go,
so well done. Because
yeah,
first of all, I just want to repeat it, because when it's short, it usually means there was way more work that went into making it short. It's the
right.
long bios that are the quick, easy ones. So my journey is probably a lot like yours. I mean, some variation of this is
Yeah,
basically what every firm needs to say. And it's
right.
not your journey necessarily, but it's like your expertise and the kind of work you've done, and my knowledge and what I bring to the table resonates with people like you because of XYZ. I've done this, and I first understand why you're here and I know how to help. Like that
Right.
is, it seems so simple. And that's why I'm kind of focusing on it extra for a moment, because so many people get it wrong. So, like,
Right.
go back to your website and you probably think it says something like that, but it doesn't.
It
It's
doesn't, it doesn't.
yeah.
Well, and truthfully, nobody wants to read your resume.
No,
You're not looking to get hired at a law firm where they're looking at your resume.
no.
The people need to know enough to know that, I have a law license, and
Yep.
nobody comes in and asks you your GPA. As a matter of fact, I had
Right?
my cousin's a lawyer,
Yeah.
and he told me years ago, he said, Davina, in all the years I've been practicing, not one person has ever come in and asked me where I went to law school or what my GPA is.
Yeah, no.
And that would shock a lot of sort of blue blood
Yes.
lawyers and law firms
And
where that has
and law
such meaning
students. Yeah.
to them. That
Yeah.
has such meaning to them. And it's
Yes.
like, but
Move on.
there's a whole market out there that is happy to pay lawyers to help them solve problems. They don't care as long as when they talk to you that they feel confident that you get them, you get the problem, and you can help solve the problem, right?
Yes.
It's a different
Yes.
thing.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get to this is like your little corner of the world, building these wealth generating law firms. So what are some marketing tips that like just out of the box? Like let's say it's someone who is not necessarily a brand new lawyer, but who's been doing this for a while and things aren't going so well. So they're coming to you for help and you're looking at what they've got going on and what are the first like couple things that you see over and over and over that are like,
Yeah.
we got to address this right away.
Yeah. So I think first, number one is if you hate it, you won't do it. And I
Yes.
sort of give people permission to not do things that
Yes.
they don't enjoy at all. And so I'm a person, I love to speak. I have a podcast. I go on podcasts. That's great. I don't like the hassle of traveling to a conference and speaking at a conference and all that. So I don't go in that direction. I get invited to do things. I don't like doing CLEs because I don't like the hassle of jumping through hoops to
Yeah.
meet some bar association's demands for what I need to do for CLE.
Yeah.
But I have a thriving business because I focus on something I really love to do, which
Yeah.
has conversations with smart people who, love talking about what I love talking about.
Yeah.
And, looking for those places that I can reach people in mass online
Yeah.
because I love working from home. I love spending time with my husband and my dog. I'm not somebody, I can speak. I have done it before, but it just doesn't thrill me. So the first
I
thing
am
I say to
so on
people,
the same
yeah,
page with this.
yeah,
And I think that it kind of shows up when you're doing, because I do the same thing and I have done it over and over. And every time I do it, I'm like, what am I doing to myself?
why
I
am I doing
hate
this? Why
this.
did I do
Yeah.
this? I had to do these slides. I
Yeah.
had to do
Oh
this.
my gosh, the slides. Yeah, all of it. And I'm like, no. And then that'll be fresh for a certain amount of time. And then a certain amount of time passes and I think, oh, maybe. And then I learn
Well,
it
it's one
again.
of the things I will
Yeah.
say that I think happens with women is
Yes.
that we are so happy to be asked.
Yeah.
I'm so happy somebody asked me,
Yeah.
and then we feel obligated to do it because we think to ourselves, well, they asked me, it's a great opportunity. I'm going to,
Yeah.
instead of asking, is it something that really brings me joy? And can
Right.
I get my clients by doing something else that I really like to do? So
Well,
that's
that's
number
the other
one.
side of it. Like, does it even matter to your bottom line? Or are
Right.
you doing this out of some sense of obligation? Because I've done that too. I've shown up at places and I'm like, none of the people in this audience are my clients. And so this is a complete waste of time. So you really need to kind
Exactly.
of ask yourself in a very kind of harsh way, like, really, does this matter? Am I going to get, and are there any
Yeah, is this
clients of
even
mine
gonna
there?
get is it yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And asking yourself, I mean, and I think that's the thing too, is we often get sucked into doing things because somebody tells us exposure,
Yeah.
we're gonna get
Right.
exposure.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't, I'm a highly qualified person
Yeah.
who's done many things. I don't need any more. Like I need exposure to my audience in the way that I want to
Right.
show up for my audience. So that's
Exactly.
the first thing I would say to people. And then the other piece of advice I have for people is, do you have more time or more money? Because if you have more time, then you might do a lot of organic things if you don't
Yes.
yet have the cash flow to be able to pay for advertising and stuff like that. And
Right.
if you have more money, then you might start doing things like investing in online advertising. I
Yep.
mean,
Team
every lawyer
members.
eventually needs to find
Yeah.
that Google's sweet spot, because
Yep.
Google is what Yellow Pages used to be, right? Everybody goes, even if they hear about you, they go to Google and look you up.
Right.
For my business, I do a lot of Facebook and Instagram because there's an education piece. People aren't sitting around thinking I need a coach.
Yep.
Like they sit around and think I just hit somebody with my car, I need an attorney, right?
Right.
They're not
Right.
thinking the same. So, but Google is definitely where lawyers need to be to begin with if they have, if now they're like, I don't have any more time for networking luncheons or speaking engagements or podcast interviews or whatever it is. Let me go put some money behind this and hire somebody to help me with my online presence
Yes.
so that that can be doing work for me 24/7 while I'm off living my
Being a lawyer
life and
or
my
being a lawyer.
teams
Yeah.
being a lawyer, right?
Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
Okay. So
So those are a couple pieces of advice I give people right out of the
I
gate.
think those are really, really good to just get your thoughts around things that you might not be doing correctly, or rethinking some of the ideas. But we've mentioned a bunch of times your podcast now, so I also want to spend a minute talking about podcasting because I really feel like it's one of the most underrated marketing strategies, especially for law firms. And people are overwhelmed by the idea, so they just kind of push it over to the side, like, that's sort of scary.
I
So
wouldn't
let's,
know what to talk about. I wouldn't
yeah,
know who to talk to. I wouldn't know,
I've never
you
known a
know,
lawyer that doesn't know how to talk.
and it's all of this is I don't like the sound of my voice. I
Yep.
don't like to see myself on video.
Yeah.
And I will say, as a woman who is like on the verge of 60, I'm like this close to it. I and having gone through all this in my 40s and 50s, I don't love to see myself on camera. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not my dream. And of course, listening to your voice, everybody when you first start recording, you listen to your voice and go, that's not really
You're
what
like,
I sound like.
ew. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And so, but I think the key to that is once you get in, if you focus on the other person and the conversation
Yes.
and the people who may be listening and what they're going to get out of it.
Yep.
So you're focused on the giving aspect of it,
Yeah.
you begin to rise above your own inhibitions about it. And of course, just like anything else, the more you do it, the
Yeah.
more you're like comfortable
Comfortable,
doing it.
and you
Right.
look and sound better too when you're more comfortable with it. But it's kind of like saying, I don't want to start a law firm because I'm afraid that when I pick up the phone, I'm going to sound weird on the phone. Like everybody, I feel like when you are fresh out of college or law school or whatever, they have these kind of like, what am I going to say moments? But you push through that. Like you don't let
They-
that stop you from starting your law firm.
yeah.
And so, in the same way for the podcast, yeah, I look back, there's of course the whole growth of every platform, whether it's social media or whatever, there's cringy moments and there's going to be
Yeah.
things that you say
There's
where you're like,
definitely stuff that if
yeah,
I'd go back, if I went back and listened to it, I'd probably be like, "Oh, Davina, why'd
take
you
it
say
down.
that?"
Yeah, take it
But I
down.
will say
Yeah.
that, but I will say there's a couple of tricks for people who are thinking about podcasting. One is
Yes.
that I don't really go back. I produce so much content that I don't really have time to go back and listen. Occasionally, I have listened to a podcast of mine, and I usually I go, that was really good. That was a
Yeah.
really good conversation, right?
Yes.
So because there's another person there. Now I do individual podcasts as well, right? But I think for me, I just keep moving
Yeah.
forward. I keep putting stuff out there,
Yeah.
and what I do is, and this is kind of woo woo, is I always sort of say to myself, I kind of ask the universe to let whoever needs to hear this message, right?
Yes.
So it's about it reframes my mind in terms of my audience saying, whoever needs to hear this, let them hear this,
Yep.
right? And then they show up on my sales calls,
Yes.
and they say, I've been listening to your podcast
Yeah.
and I love it. And it just so thank you so much for the podcast. It's helped me
Yep.
so much. And that
It's
is rewarding.
it is for sure the best way I have found to do what the phrase I hate using, but I have to use, is thought leadership. And every attorney who is building their firm, not every, but the majority of them, they will, in their initial calls with me, they will use this phrase, I want to be a thought leader and blah, blah, blah. And if that is at all on your radar, or maybe even 5 years down the road, which if it is, this is a great time to start a podcast because you want time to build it and, do it and go through those cringy moments. But it absolutely is the best way to
Oh, it's a
create your
credibility.
expertise. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I get
You're
those
the
same calls,
authority.
and I know when they say that they've listened to my podcast, I know this is a good one because
Yeah.
they are selling themselves on me, where it's
Right.
like, while I'm sleeping or doing whatever, they are listening or watching my podcast episodes, and I'm doing my own sales for them through that. Also, the
Yeah.
other little kind of technical tactic is, if you're doing a podcast, you should absolutely take advantage of every part of the content. So be doing video as much as you, that's also
Yeah.
feeling like
My first year, I
uncomfortable.
didn't do video
Yep.
because the people I hired that encouraged me to start a podcast didn't do, they said, no, these podcast listeners like audio, they don't want video. And I thought, and then when I let them go, I was like, this is wasted
Yep.
value. I could be using this content because video is huge now and I could be using it
Huge.
everywhere else.
Yeah.
I'll say that to your point about authority figure. I'm going to tell a story, give you an example
Yes.
real quick. I have a client, Holly Draper, and she is the founder of Draper Law Firm. And one of the things when we first started working together, we were looking, she says, I've hired all these lawyers because we had this Supreme Court case. And now that case is over. I need to keep these lawyers busy.
Yeah.
So I need to up my marketing game. And one of the tactics that we used was to start a podcast. And she had to really think about, well, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And her podcast is Texas Family Law Insiders. And it's an excellent podcast if you're a family lawyer in Texas. And I told her, I said, there's different ways you get value. One is
Yeah.
you get value from your audience, which we all know, but you also get value in the people you have on as guests.
Yes.
And if you will, those connections that you make, you and I are an example of that.
Yep.
The connection that we make, getting to know each other and having this thing in common and having this great conversation. And you've been on my podcast, I've been on your podcast.
Yes.
And we're top of mind
Yep.
with each other, right?
Yep.
And those connections mean a lot. And I think that gives you an excuse to call people up and say, hey, would you like to be on my podcast?
Yes.
Because otherwise you'd be calling them up, asking them for coffee. And they'd be like, I don't
Yeah.
really drink coffee. I don't really want to, I don't have time for coffee.
Right.
But everybody's
Right.
got time to be on your podcast
Right.
because it promotes their business as
It's
well, or whatever it is
mutual
they're
value.
doing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Exactly. The last little tactic I was going to add in terms of podcasting is when you do all those different platforms. So I use a platform called Riverside, and I do not get ad money or whatever for promoting them. I just think they're amazing because they record the video, and then I can pull out social media and whatever for all of those pieces. Then I then also use those clips for TikTok, for Reels, all of that, and for ads. And video ads perform a bajillion times more successfully than still ads. And video ads where we're talking about some really awesome thing and I have a clip from a guest, and like it's so much better than me like talking, showing my website, and we're talking and like having a sales page about email marketing or some, some like, totally
Yeah.
advertising looking thing. So I will just say, like, there's all these levels of things you can do with your podcast that a lot of people don't think about.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Awesome. Okay. Any like quick last minute tips from your podcast, from either the guest or kind of things you've learned over the life of your podcast? Because you're in year 5 now, right?
Year 5. I
Oh
know.
my
I
gosh,
think
that's amazing.
well, let's see. We started in 2019. So whatever that adds up to. Yeah. So
we're going into year 6 then.
It's 6 year. Yeah. 6 year. So it's very exciting. I will say this. One tip I have is that it takes time, right?
Yes.
So you're building a body of work. And I think a lot of us don't think about that in our careers, right?
Yeah.
The value of a body of work. I've written 2 books. That's part of my body of work. I have going in my 6th year of my podcast. That's part of my body of work.
Yes.
I've produced a lot of webinars and trainings and ebooks and things. That's part of my body of work.
Yep.
So looking at it, when you start to look at it that way and say, I'm building a body of work that goes out into the world and establishes my brand and attracts like-minded people who are wanting what it is that I'm doing. They want to come over here and play with me.
Yes.
That's the power of any sort of content-driven marketing. And I think video is really where it's at. Like a lot of people love podcasts and audio, but video is everywhere.
The future.
And people will come and they will meet me and they will say, I have your voice in my head. I
How
heard
weird.
your I
Yeah.
heard you telling me, right? And
Yes.
you're like, "Whoa, I don't even
Yeah.
know you." But that's powerful. I mean, you can't
Yes.
get better, more powerful marketing than that for
Yes.
somebody who they already feel like I'm their coach.
Yes.
Now it's a matter of whether or not they want to take it to the
Hey,
next
yeah,
level,
right.
right?
Exactly. Amazing. I think that is it. Exactly what my experience with podcasting has been
Yeah,
too.
and you
But
want them to feel like you're already their attorney. You're their
yes.
lawyer. When
Yes.
they need you, that you're the one that's going to get a
Yeah.
call, right?
They've already got it filed away in the back of their mind and you're top of mind and it's there. But I just want to underline the idea of patience because I say that all the time. This is the thing that nobody wants to hear, but it is one of the most important things when it comes to marketing is patience and the other one is consistency. But patience is the thing that people have the biggest challenge
I will tell you,
with.
I'm going to address the consistency because I
Yeah.
just this week had a sales call with somebody and she said to me, I've been listening to your podcast. And she goes, I just thank you so much for it. I appreciate it. And she says, and I love that you're consistent because a
Yes.
lot of people are not. And
Yeah.
I was like, if she only knew, like some weeks I'm
I
going,
know.
mine's weekly and it
Yeah.
has been the whole time.
Yeah.
And I have methods for sort of how I do weeks when I'm just like gone and I just can't prepare ahead of time or whatever. I have things that I do, but and you think to yourself, nobody's going to notice if I don't put out a podcast episode this week.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to notice that. And
Yeah.
there may be a lot of people who don't notice,
Right.
but your loyal fans, they
They
will
notice.
notice.
Yeah,
They notice.
absolutely. Okay, so it's time for a quick book review. Davina, what is the book that you're going to add to our library today?
This is like a game show quiz or something. So I want to tell you Who Not How by
Yes.
Dan Sullivan and his co-author Benjamin Hardy. And the reason, so this is a book that it's not something I'm currently reading. It is something I've read in the past
It's a
that
classic.
is a life changer, right? There are a lot of business books out there that are interesting and you learn things in the moment and then you forget about them.
Yeah.
Who Not How, I didn't even read the whole book and it changed my life, right?
Yes.
That I mean, that's powerful, right?
Yeah.
And part of it is he actually showcases what he means by Who Not How because he has an author who writes the book for him.
Yeah.
Dan Sullivan is the author. Benjamin Hardy is the one who actually wrote the book,
He's like
right?
the ghostwriter who is
Yeah.
actually like doing all the work
Yeah,
and
they're
behind the
co-writer.
background.
He's
Yeah.
doing the work and
Yeah.
Dan Sullivan's just showing up being Dan Sullivan. So, but the reason it resonates for me and the reason I would love for particularly women lawyers to listen to it, but men as well, is because I find that high achieving women, one of our biggest problems is that we became high achieving based on our own hard work. So
Yeah.
we went to college, got good grades in school, we got the gold stars, we went to college, we went to law school, we took the exam, all these things. And all of that was based on our hard work. We started our own law firm out of our own hard work. But if you want to scale to be $1 million, multi-million dollar, 8-figure law firm, you have got to learn how to ask yourself who, not how.
Yes.
So, not how do I do this thing that I want to? How do I start a podcast? Karin has inspired me to start a podcast today. So I'm going to start a podcast. How do I do that?
Yes.
No, you want to ask, who is it that already has this knowledge that can help me start a podcast where all I have to do is just get on the
Show up.
microphone and show up, right?
Yes.
And that is such a powerful change in the way that we think. And
Yep.
it was huge for me because I'm that high achieving woman who's
Right.
like, I'm going to do this myself. I'm like Sisyphus pushing
Yeah.
that rock up the hill, right?
Right.
But
But there's a limit to your strength.
there's a
And when
limit.
you bring in all those extra people as part of your team, now all of a sudden you're multiplying and that's how you ripple out and scale. And there's just
Yeah.
no way, like as a solo, you're only going to ever have so many hours in your day and be able to work with so many clients. And so to try to figure out how to scale to that next level, you have to
You've
bring
got
in,
to have other people.
you've got to have the who's. You got to,
And I will say
yeah.
from a marketing standpoint, I'll use as an example, I have a social media manager that I've worked with for, oh gosh, 2 or 3 years now for Instagram. And
Yes.
she is an expert on Instagram. She has a law degree, by the way, but
Oh my
she has
gosh.
an Instagram business
Yeah.
and she is an expert. She knows when they're changing the algorithm, when they're doing things, whatever. She tells me what kind of content performs, what doesn't. She gives me instructions. I try to accommodate her as best I can. Sometimes I'm like, I can't do this thing or that.
Right.
But her expertise, I don't have time to go learn all that,
No.
research it, sit there and stitch videos together and put captions on. I don't have time for that.
No.
I want somebody who's an expert in that area who could do that. So my clients are talking about Instagram. I'm like, here, hire this person or
Yes.
find somebody else like who does this, because you don't need to be an expert in everything.
No,
You
and
need to
if you
be
try
your
to,
thing.
you're taking away from your own expertise in that in your main thing.
Right.
So there's, we did a Gallup Strength Finder at the end of grad school too. And the whole point there, which I think it's called something else now, but the whole idea of Strength Finder is like, let's recognize your strengths. And then those other things, we're going to set those aside because they are distracting,
Right.
whatever,
Right.
you from your best work. And so let's
Clifton
focus.
Strengths. I love it.
That's what it is.
I
It's
love
the
it.
same thing. I think they
Yeah,
like rebranded or
it's
something.
by Gallup. It's called Clifton Strengths.
Yes.
Mine
exactly.
is I'm a strategic thinker and a relationship person. The top 6 are all either strategic thinker or relationship. So I'm like, okay, coaching is definitely sort of my thing that I love.
That's so
Right.
funny.
'Cause-
I'm strategic analytic. So
Oh,
I am just
okay.
like strategic and then I will get it done. I will not
Yeah.
talk about things if it's not going to happen. So I love
Uh,
that. So, okay. So the book is Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. It's a classic. We'll obviously link to that on the show page and everything, but it's such a good mindset. And we were even laughing before we started recording about how the whole concept you can kind of get from the title of the book.
Yeah, the title of the book. I mean, it's pretty much there.
Yeah, but you read it, but also like take that whole concept, whether you read it or not, kind of, and soak that in. Davina Frederick is the founder and CEO of Wealthy Women Lawyer and the podcast Wealthy Woman Lawyer. It is such a good podcast. You really, really need to tune into that and recognize these advantages that we have as women that can definitely be used in a marketing perspective, as well as all of your other business building things. But we're talking about marketing here. And don't downplay those. Those are unique advantages that you can definitely use in a way to build your law firm. And then when you get to that point where you're building it, reach out to Davina and get to the 7 figures too. So thank you so much for
Karin.
being here.
Thanks, Karin. I really enjoyed it, as usual, when I talk to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Counsel Cast podcast. Be sure to visit our website at counsel-cast.com for the resources mentioned on the episode and to give us your feedback. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate if you could rate and review the podcast on Apple and subscribe to your favorite podcast platform. See you on the next one.